Awesome. Thanks for coming, everyone. That was a great introduction. My name is Rob. We're going to be talking a little bit about bug bounty programs, some things specific to Uber's bug bounty, and just some lessons and insights we've had in the last year or two of running our bug bounty program. So, cool. My name is Rob Fletcher. I work on the product security team at Uber. Previous bug bounty participant. Enjoyed responsible disclosure programs for quite a while, and ended up getting me two of my previous jobs, including this one at Uber. So found some bugs, reported it, got a good rapport going with the team, and ended up getting invited in to interview. And then, had to jump through all those hoops still, but it was a nice foot in the door, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too. For the past year, I've been actively managing the Uber bug bounty program, so it's been fun to see initially being a researcher, disclosing bugs, and then now getting to be on the other end of a program and managing what it means to get the bugs fixed internally, and the different challenges there has been pretty interesting. So that's a bit about what this talk is about. Separate from security, I'm a big fan of GIFs. I include my favorite GIF of the year at the end on the last slide, so if that's reason for anybody that's a fan of GIFs to stay, I'll use that as a carrot. So besides that, a big fan of stand-up comedy, and as of late, been playing chess with my wife. Pretty terrible at it, but it's a lot of fun, and it's fun to go out to a bar and have a beer and play chess. So. Cool. So before we dove in, I thought it'd probably be worthwhile to spend a few seconds talking about the program and why it may or may not be interesting to you. So we've been, March 22nd was our 1-year anniversary of our public program. Before that, we were private for about a year. To date, we've awarded 974,000 plus in bounties, and across 500 plus reports. And something that we're pretty proud of that's pretty interesting is that this map here shows our top 50 researchers and the countries they're from, and there's 26 different countries from our top 50 researchers. So having a global product and things like that, it's really awesome to be able to see this, and yeah, we're excited about that. Cool, so next up, I thought I'd take a second to highlight our top 10 researchers. Top 10 as defined by HackerOne's reputation rank, so not our calculation, but all of these are really great researchers and a big part of why we have a quality program, so I wanted to take a second to thank them. Besides that, I also wanted to take a second to highlight our team. I know this is not terribly relevant to the stuff we do, but I think seeing a face for a name kind of plays nicely into some of the points I'm going to make later as far as how you interact with people and what it means to have professional relationships. So all in all, we're going to start off Souptonuts, an ideal bug bounty experience. It came to my attention, not everybody knows what the Souptonuts idiom is. So it's an American saying where a full course dinner would start with soup and end with a dessert of nuts. So it's kind of from front to end, all encompassing. So today you learned a random fact about Souptonuts if you didn't already know it. And then we'll dive into a little bit and talk about what maximizing report value looks like for Uber and how we determine value and what security impact means for us. And then finally, pretty excited to announce some updates to our program that'll roll out in the next day or so. Cool, so this will be the meat of the talk. The goal is really to provide some insight from our program's experience and hopefully help researchers maximize their experience with programs and vice versa. We're gonna kind of lay out what an ideal experience would be like, why it's good for the researcher, why it's good for the program, and hopefully welcome any feedback, but this has been our experiences to date. So. The first one is not technical at all, and it could be surprising to some, but one of the things I wanted to highlight is this idea of assuming the best intent and giving people benefit of the doubt. Electronic communication is hard. It's often, especially when there are language barriers and different cultural norms on how to address communication, and it can sometimes turn to a not positive experience, and at the very least not a productive experience with reporting bugs. So a good example is just being respectful peer-to-peer, treat somebody like you would if you were talking to them right in front of you. I think oftentimes the screen and anonymity of the internet can sometimes discourage that, but if you just, that's one outlook I've found to help me personally. Negative example is very adversarial interactions, assuming malicious intent, immediately assuming we're trying to deceive you or lying to you about something. I think with security that becomes a little easier because it's kind of our job to assume malicious intent, right? When we find vulnerabilities, we have to put the black hat on and assume the attacker's mindset and look for things that are wrong. And so sometimes it's hard to separate from that in communication when you're trying to interact with people in a bug bounty program. And so the advantages here for both people are essentially the same thing. Our advantages from the program angle is we get to maintain healthy relationships, and researchers maintain healthy relationships as well. We'll hit on that a little later on this kind of reputation you build in the security community and why that's important. Cool, the next one. Evaluating security impact and being willing to learn and teach. This one is actually one of the more exciting ones from the program's angle. So by definition, when somebody finds a bug, they're educating us as something we didn't know previously. So that's the obvious example. It can become more nuanced where based on the region or the way you're using our product is not something our team is doing, and we may be hitting a different code path. And so being willing to educate us beyond saying, hey, I found something, but like, hey, this is what's happening. You guys, it looks like you're seeing something different, and taking that approach versus, again, immediately being adversarial or, you know, saying we're dumb or something like that, like, it doesn't help at all. So a positive example here is if we present mitigations, understanding mitigations and how that can affect security impact. So in fraud, for example, you may have been able to take a free ride, but if your account goes into arrears, that's a very limiting factor on any wide-scale exploit of that specific bug. Now, if you were able to take free rides and your account didn't go into arrears, that's a different situation, but that's kind of where we start talking about mitigations and being willing to understand them. A negative example is overhyping your report or claiming dire straits when it's not the case. That's not going to get you a higher bounty, or not you, but researchers in general. In those situations, it's not going to end up getting you a higher bounty. It's just going to end up making us frustrated and more work for us to actually figure out what's going on. So the advantage for us in this situation is that we get a better understanding of risk and we get to learn something from researchers, which is always fun. It's impossible to know everything, so it's really exciting when somebody can kind of teach you something, and I think Finite's self-XSS is a great example of that, where he was able to demonstrate why self-XSS in a specific scenario was still pretty damaging. So for the researcher, it's pretty standard, just higher bounty, like helping us understand, making sure we know the nuances and really understand security impact means more bounty for you, or for the researcher. And so it should also work, one thing I wanted to highlight is it should work in both directions. So if we expect researchers to be willing to teach us and show us things, we should also, from the program angle, be willing to teach them and explain when they have misunderstandings. So that comes from general technology angles, like that's not quite how this works and this is why, and here's some links that might help, to also educating about Uber-specific mitigations that are separate from general security technology. So it's kind of double-edged sword, and programs need to treat the researchers the same way. Awesome. So report quality, succinct and reproducible. This one is actually one of the more difficult ones. Is a positive example I have up there is like a one-click POC, proof of concept, and that is probably the ideal situation with a succinct paragraph on your understanding or the researcher's understanding of security impact versus something like a speculative report that has lots of hand waving and saying, if service X is able to make request Y, then thing Z happens. That's not helpful, it's not reproducible, we can't file that with an internal team to fix, there's no actionable details. The reason this is hard is because short isn't necessarily better. Sometimes different issues require more explanation, but it's kind of an art where you're able to explain the issue, have a nice POC that is, I mean, it's never really one click. I'm not gonna run a script that you hand me and just click it and not look at it, but it should at least explain a bit what that means. It's being able to look at it, run it locally or in a VM and understand what's going on, and then not even have to ask any more questions. Just say, yep, awesome, verified this is a real thing, and we're filing internally. So for us, the great advantage here is we get our fix out faster. The less back and forth on tickets, the easier it is for us to understand the issue and then file it internally and get it fixed faster. I mean, that's pretty obvious. For the researcher, it ends up if we get the vulnerability fixed faster, then faster to bounty time, essentially. So you'll end up getting your payout quicker. And I think a common misconception is that when somebody finds a bug, that there are 15 other people that have this bug in their hand and they are writing their reports as you're writing your report, and there's this worry that they're going to click send right before you click send and you don't get the report. So a lot of people want to be first to report something. And it is, that makes some sense, but when there's not enough actionable details, that becomes, being first doesn't really matter. We'll talk about this in the program, what we consider valuable, but we have a first in, best dressed policy, and what that essentially means is the first report with enough actionable details is first, not the one with the first timestamp that later ended up explaining after 15 questions back and forth what it was. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is it's tempting to roll a bunch of reports into one, or a bunch of issues into one report, but you should keep those unique reports, and if you have a chaining scenario, just add that in a comment on each of them. You can imagine when things get fixed at different times, or bounty awards, stuff like that. If we have to wait to resolution to pay bounty and you have 4 reports and 4 issues in one report, then we have to wait to pay out all of them, essentially, which becomes not ideal for anyone. So. Cool. I think this will kind of hit on the last thing as far as an ideal bug bounty experience from our angle is being professional, patience and empathy, treat it like a job, like you would interact with somebody face to face. I won't reread the quote, but this is a quote from a real person on one of our real tickets. So, nobody wants to be talked to like that, and I would imagine this person wouldn't do that in a face-to-face scenario with whoever they imagined they were speaking to. So, yeah, those examples speak for themselves. The program advantage is we have a better ability to understand the nuances of a report. When we can go back and forth and treat somebody as a peer and ask questions, we're better able to, there's less confusion, and that helps us all around. And I've alluded to this a bit, but the researcher advantage here is, the security community is actually pretty small. Sometimes it doesn't seem like that, but we end up building reputations for better or for worse, and maybe getting a job isn't something that researchers are interested in. But if they are, being professional is definitely going to go a long way. And even if you're not, reputations make the rounds through programs, and it's just a fact, right? So it's not good if nobody wants to work with you. So I would encourage people to just treat it like a job. And this one I will say something on. It came to my attention, not everybody exactly knows what YouTube comments is supposed to mean, and so this idea is this anonymous comments and people talking the way they would never actually speak to somebody in real life, and using very derogatory terms, and these are not the same things, so don't treat it like that, would be my general advice to researchers. Cool, so we got through the first main chunk there. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about Uber-specific stuff and how we kind of determine the value of any given report. So, to start, our user security is our top priority. So monetary impact to Uber is a far, far second. There are tons of reasons, including more retroactive or responsive type mitigations where we come and put a freeze on somebody's account, or we are able to charge back via credit card things after the fact. And just the bottom line is, users trust us with their data, and so we need to be deserving of that trust, and that's why we put that as our top priority. I think sometimes it's not obvious to people on why we don't care more about direct monetary impact, and it's not that we don't care, but it's that we need to protect our users' security, and so that's why we prioritize that. The next fact here is security impact. So cleverness and complexity is always fun for our team, and I love seeing reports like that because as security nerds, it's fun to read something and all the nuances and see how somebody was able to accomplish something. But the bottom line is we pay based on security impact. So if you had a source code leak that took 6 months and was doing covert things to siphon out our source code, and you finally built an entire tree of it versus you found some open S3 bucket and downloaded a tarball in 4 minutes, those are getting the same payment. Definitely interested to read the first report, but the way we approach bounties is that it's security impact, not cleverness. So besides that, a couple of things to consider are the scale of exposure and severity of exposure. So when we talk scale, is it one of our users, 10 of our users, 10% of our users? Is it only Uber corporate employees? Is it all of our drivers, all of our riders? Is it everybody that's ever touched Uber ever, right? So considering security impact, we kind of think scale of exposure a lot of times. So besides that, there's also the type of info exposed. So is it just a user UUID, which is a unique identifier within our system? Is it their address? Is it some kind of bearer or authentication token? PII, user location data, or cream of the crop is various types of data that's protected by the government. So in the States, that's health data, for example. So besides those things, I thought I'd give a few examples on different scales of what we consider to be most impactful. So I'll start at the bottom, even though this kind of top down, is authorized data exposure. So it would be on the lower end of security impact. So you can imagine a driver accepting a trip with a rider, and then somehow they get non-anonymized phone numbers. Definitely interested in that. We want to fix that. But when the driver clicks accept and the rider signs our terms of service, there's this authorized relationship, which isn't ideal, but it's covered in our terms of service, and you're kind of accepting this relationship. So a little higher than that, we get to rate limiting issues. So I will say this is rate limiting separate from auth, so separate from authentication, because that moves more towards account takeover, which is up there at the top. But if you're able to spam Uber users with emails at any given rate without getting blocked, we're definitely interested in it, and it's getting a little closer as far as security impact goes. And location data. So now we're getting real warm. This is something we care a lot about. You can imagine trip history data for a rider or driver. One trip, and then we talk scale, right? Is this one trip? Are you able to pull trip history for an entire user object for all of time? Are you able to pull trip history for all of our users from forever? Things like that become very, very interesting for us. And then at the top here, we have account takeover and unrestricted access to a user data store. So you can imagine an SQL-like injection in our data store that lets you pull everything. That has luckily not happened. Maybe real wood around here somewhere. But that would be something we care about a lot for obvious reasons. And then account takeover, password reset vulns, ATO via OAuth token leakage. We've seen some interesting bugs with our state machine for user accounts and being able to move it from a state that you weren't supposed to and do account takeover. Those are all really interesting. And again, we can consider scale here, right? Are you going to be able to take over any account that ever signed up for Uber? Are you going to be able to take over accounts that signed up via Facebook OAuth from 2016 only? And that type of scale can start to really define security impact for us. Awesome. So next part, I'm excited to announce the Bug Bounty program updates. So we'll dive right in. Yeah, so the bottom line is we're going to do more money faster. And the way we're going to do that is we're increasing our minimum bounty from 100 to 500. After a year of public, we understand our attack surface better. We've gotten a lot of the low-hanging fruit out of the way, and we want to make sure to keep quality researchers engaged and keep our program quality high. And so to do that, we are going to raise the minimum. We've got about 70, I don't know how many, but we have some set of tickets in our triaged queue now. We will be awarding all of them the new minimum bounty as well, so that it seems like the right thing to do in general, even though they were triaged before this policy change. So, and then separate from that, we're going to start awarding minimum bounty at time of triage and then the full bounty at time of resolution. I've spoken a little bit about how we award based on security impact. So you can imagine, let's say there's an S3 bucket leaking data and it's just bleeding all over the place. We verify that, we move it to the triaged state. At that point, our job is to stop the bleeding. Like, we need to cut off exposure. So we cut off exposure, and then we finally move it to the resolved state. We're able to investigate the level of exposure, what kind of data, the scale, all the various things I talked about on the previous slides. We're able to go through that. So to award the proper bounty, it kind of required us to wait until time of resolution. But we realized it's important for researchers. Time to bounty is a really big thing, and sometimes it's not the researcher's fault when sometimes issues take longer to resolve than intended. Sometimes that's just a fact of the matter with how big companies run, but hopefully this kind of bridges that gap where we're awarding something right when we triage it, and it's our new minimum of 500, and then at time of resolution we will issue another bounty if needed. So, and I think that is it. This is my favorite GIF, I promised you. Wait for it though. There we go. So, thank you. If anybody had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, security.uber.com will take you to our bug bounty program, and we'd love to see you come hack us and make some money.
Rob, I've got one question maybe to start. What's the biggest bounty you've ever paid until now?
10,000 is our top.
Okay. 10,000.
Yes. And we've had one person get several 10,000 bounties. So.
Okay, that probably was one of the persons that you showed in one of the first slides.
Yes, it was.
I can imagine. Somebody else got a question for Rob. No?
Awesome.
Okay, well, thanks then, Rob.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.